The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the grand mansion, casting long golden rays across the polished marble floor. The mansion was silent, except for the quiet footsteps of the maid as she moved from room to room, dusting and arranging things with care. Her young son, a bright-eyed boy of about 10, trailed behind her, carrying a small cloth to help with dusting. He was a quiet child, always observant, and he looked around the mansion with a mixture of curiosity and awe. Every corner of the mansion spoke of wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, glittering in the sunlight. Thick carpets lined the floors, soft and colorful, and the walls were adorned with paintings that looked expensive and old. The boy's eyes wandered everywhere, but he was especially drawn to one thing: a grand piano in the center of the living room. It was unlike any instrument he had ever seen. Its black polished surface shone, and its ivory keys looked both inviting and intimidating. The maid noticed him staring, and she smiled gently. "One day you might play it," she said softly, but her voice carried a hint of sadness. She knew the world they lived in, the world of wealth and class, and she knew that such dreams were often just that, dreams. Today, the mistress of the house, a tall woman with sharp eyes and an air of confidence, was in the living room with a few friends. They were laughing and chatting, the sound echoing across the marble floors. The young boy crept closer to the piano, his small hands brushing lightly over the keys. He did not know how to play, not really, but he loved the sound that came from the instrument. It fascinated him, made his heart beat a little faster. The mistress noticed him. Her eyes narrowed, and a smile, sharp and mocking, spread across her face. "Well, well," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "Look at our little visitor. Do you like the piano, boy?" The boy nodded shyly, not daring to speak. The mistress laughed, a cold musical laugh that made the boy shrink back. "If you can play this piano, I might even consider adopting you," she said, her words dripping with amusement. The guests laughed along with her, not realizing the weight those words carried for the boy. He felt his cheeks burn, a mixture of embarrassment and determination rising inside him. He looked at his mother, who gave him a small, reassuring smile. She could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to play, to prove himself, but he also felt the fear of failure. The mistress continued to mock him, making it clear that she did not expect him to succeed. After the guests left, the boy remained in the living room, sitting in front of the grand piano. He pressed a key, then another, listening to the soft sounds that came out. They were not perfect, not even close, but they were his. He remembered songs he had heard his mother sing, tunes from the streets, melodies that had stuck in his mind. He began to hum softly as he pressed the keys, trying to make sense of the music. The notes stumbled at first, awkward and uneven, but he persisted. Days passed, and every morning, before the mansion fully awoke, the boy would sit at the piano. He learned to recognize the keys, to feel where his fingers should go. Sometimes he would make mistakes that made him want to give up, but he always returned, driven by a quiet determination. His mother would often stand at the doorway, watching him, her heart swelling with pride. She could see that he had a gift, a passion that could not be ignored, that the other staff in the mansion began to notice too. The cook, the gardener, even the chauffeur would sometimes pause to listen as the boy played. There was something special about the way he approached the piano, a kind of raw talent that did not need lessons or instructions. It was as if the music flowed from his heart directly to the keys. Meanwhile, the mistress of the house continued her daily routines, unaware that her mocking words had ignited a spark. She would sometimes glance at the piano, curious about the boy's progress, but her pride and arrogance prevented her from acknowledging anything positive. To her, the idea that a poor boy could play the piano was absurd. One afternoon, The boy's mother brought him a small, worn-out book of music she had found in the market. It was old and tattered, but it contained simple melodies that he could learn. He studied the book diligently, trying to match the notes to the keys. Slowly, piece by piece, he began to play simple songs. The sound was sweet, almost magical, and it filled the otherwise quiet mansion with life. Word of his practice spread quietly among the staff. They would exchange glances, whispering their admiration for the boy's dedication. Some of them began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the boy could meet the challenge set by the mistress. But the boy himself remained humble, focused only on the music. He did not play for approval or recognition. He played because it made him feel alive. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a soft pink, the boy sat at the piano, playing a melody he had learned from the book. His fingers moved more confidently now, the notes flowing smoothly. His mother watched him, tears of joy in her eyes. She could see how much he had grown, how far he had come from the timid boy who had first touched the piano keys. That night, she whispered to him, "No matter what happens, you are already a musician in my eyes. You have courage, talent, and a heart that believes. That is more important than anyone's approval." The boy nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest. He knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The mistress's challenge still loomed over him, a shadow that reminded him of the social divide and the harsh realities of life. But he also knew that he had something no one could take away: his love for music, his dedication, and his courage to try dot as the days turned into weeks. He continued to practice, learning more complex pieces, experimenting with his own melodies, and listening to the music around him for inspiration. The grand piano, once an intimidating symbol of wealth and power, had become his companion, a friend who listened without judgment. Little did he know that the mistress of the house had begun to take notice. She had heard whispers among the staff, seen glimpses of the boy's growing confidence, and felt a stir of curiosity. Her mocking words had sparked something she did not expect: a determination and skill in the boy that challenged her assumptions about talent and class dot, and so the stage was set. The boy, with his heart full of music and determination, and the mistress, with her pride and skepticism, were on a collision course. The boy would soon face the challenge directly, and the mansion, once quiet and unchanging, would be filled with tension, anticipation, and the first notes of a story that would change their lives forever, dot in the quiet of the evening. As the boy practiced alone, a small smile appeared on his face. He did not yet know if he would succeed, but he knew he had tried, and that was the first step. The music echoed softly through the grand halls, a promise of what was to come, and the boy's fingers danced across the keys, carrying his hopes, dreams, and courage into the future. The morning was crisp and quiet, the kind of morning that made every sound seem clearer. The boy walked through the mansion corridors with his small notebook tucked under his arm. Inside were the sketches of notes he had learned and the melodies he had heard in his head. Today was special. He had decided he would practice with more focus, as if preparing for something important. He did not yet know that this determination was already noticed by the household. His mother followed at a short distance, carrying a small bag with a few snacks for him. She watched him quietly, her heart full of worry and pride. She knew the challenge from the mistress would come soon. She knew the mockery would sting, but she also knew that her son had a rare determination that could not be broken by words alone. Dot in the living room. The grand piano gleamed in the morning sunlight. Its keys seemed to invite the boy to play. He approached it carefully, touching the polished surface, feeling its smoothness under his fingertips. For a moment he paused, letting the quiet of the room sink into him. Then, slowly, he sat on the bench, pulled a small stool closer, and opened his notebook. He started with simple exercises. pressing one key after another, listening carefully to the sound, memorizing the position of each note. The boy's fingers were small and delicate, and at first they stumbled over the keys. But he did not give up. Each mistake was a lesson, each misstep a step closer to understanding the instrument. As he played, he hummed softly, letting the melody guide him. His mother watched from the doorway, a gentle smile on her face. Proud but anxious for what was coming, the mistress of the mansion entered later, carrying herself with the same elegance and sharpness she always displayed. She noticed her son's persistent practice. Her lips curved into a mocking smile, but there was also curiosity in her eyes. She had made her cruel joke before, but seeing the boy work with such focus surprised her. She lingered at the doorway, pretending not to watch, but secretly studying his movements. The boy sensed her presence, and for a moment he froze. Doubt crept into his mind. What if he failed? What if the mistress laughed even harder than before? But then he remembered his mother's words. Courage, heart, and persistence mattered more than anyone's approval. He took a deep breath and continued to play, letting his hands flow over the keys, letting the music rise from within him. As the day passed, the boy experimented with new melodies he had heard in the streets and songs his mother used to hum. He tried to combine them with what he had learned from the small book of music she had given him. Slowly, a rhythm began to form, something unique and personal. It was raw, imperfect, but beautiful in its honesty. The sound of his fingers striking the keys was becoming more confident, more deliberate. Some of the household staff, who were quietly working nearby, began to gather in small groups, drawn by the music. They exchanged glances, whispering softly to each other. They could see the boy's determination, the way his small hands moved with purpose. There was something captivating about the way he played. The chef, who was preparing lunch in the kitchen, paused to listen. The gardener, watering the plants outside, tilted his head, catching the sound through the open window. Even the butler, who usually remained distant and reserved, lingered at the edge of the room, quietly impressed. Despite the growing attention, the boy remained humble. He did not play for praise. He did not play for recognition. He played for himself, for the music that had found a home in his heart. Yet slowly, a change was taking place. His confidence was building, layer by layer, note by note. The timid curiosity he had felt at first was transforming into a quiet determination that could not be ignored. Even the mistress, who had once scoffed at his presence near the piano, could not help but notice the improvement. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly as she watched his fingers glide across the keys with increasing precision. She whispered to herself, almost reluctantly, "Perhaps he is better than I imagined." But her pride would not allow her to admit it openly. She turned away quickly, masking any hint of acknowledgement. The boy's mother stayed close, offering quiet guidance when needed. She reminded him to take breaks, to drink water, to rest his small hands. But mostly, she observed, letting him find his own rhythm, letting him make his own mistakes, letting him learn. She knew that true skill came from patience, from persistence, and from a love of what does. And she could see that her son loved this more than anything. In the afternoons, when the house was quieter, the boy tried more daring pieces. He would challenge himself with more complex arrangements, combining melodies, trying to create something new. Sometimes it worked beautifully. Sometimes he stumbled. Each time he would sigh, but then he would try again. Slowly, he began to understand not just the piano, but the music itself. He was learning to listen, to feel, to connect the notes with the emotions he wanted to express. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, the boy played a melody he had composed himself. It was simple, yet expressive, full of the innocence and curiosity that defined him. His mother watched, tears in her eyes, moved by the beauty and the emotion in his playing. She knew that no matter what happened with the mistress, her son had already achieved something remarkable. The mistress, walking past the living room, paused briefly. She could hear the music, the notes floating through the corridors. For a moment, she felt a strange sensation, a flicker of surprise and perhaps admiration. But she quickly dismissed it, her mind clinging to pride and expectation. She could not yet allow herself to acknowledge that the boy's talent was real, that his persistence was beginning to pay off. The boy did not notice her hesitation or her lingering gaze. He was lost in the music, completely absorbed. Each key he pressed was a small victory, a step toward mastery, a declaration of his resolve. He did not play to impress, he played to express, to communicate with the piano and with the world he was just beginning to understand. At night, after practice, the boy would sit by his small window in the servant quarters, listening to the distant echoes of a mansion, imagining the melodies he could create, dreaming of the music he would one day play for the world. His mother would tuck him in, whispering words of encouragement and love. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that her son had something rare, a combination of talent, courage, and heart that could carry him through challenges. In the following days, the tension in the mansion began to shift. The staff, who had initially treated the boy's practice as mere curiosity, began to see potential. They would whisper to each other, offering small advice or encouragement. Even some of the guests, when visiting, noticed the boy's dedication and skill. The mistress remained skeptical, but the whispers could not be ignored. One afternoon, the boy's mother brought him a small, additional collection of sheet music she had purchased from a second-hand store. The pages were worn, the notes slightly faded, but the music was rich and varied. The boy studied them eagerly, excited by the challenge of new pieces. Each new song was an opportunity to grow, to refine his technique, to expand his understanding of music. As he practiced, the boy also began to improvise. He experimented with different rhythms, played with the timing, and let his emotions guide the notes. Sometimes the sound was messy, unpolished, but it was real and alive. He was learning not just to follow instructions, but to create, to express, to bring his own voice to the piano. The mistress, meanwhile, could not escape the reality of his progress. She had dismissed him at first, laughed at the audacity of a poor boy attempting the grand piano, but now she found herself listening more closely. She would catch herself thinking about the music, wondering how he learned so quickly, and feeling a strange mix of disbelief and curiosity. Her mocking smile began to falter when she realized that this boy, the son of her maid, might actually rise to her challenge. One day, she approached the living room as he practiced. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, observing silently. The boy noticed her presence and froze for a moment, fear and determination warring inside him. But then he remembered his mother's words, took a deep breath, and continued to play, louder and more confident than before. The notes rang through the room, clear and expressive, and for the first time, the mistress could not deny the boy's talent. That evening, as the mansion grew quiet and the sun set behind the distant hills, the boy's mother whispered to him, "You are ready. Whether she believes it or not, you are ready." The boy nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He knew the challenge was coming, and he knew it would test everything he had learned, everything he had become. But in his heart, he also knew that no matter the outcome, he had already grown stronger, braver, and more skilled. The music was his guide, his companion, and his shield. And as he practiced one last melody before sleep, he felt a quiet confidence, a sense that he could face whatever awaited him, and that the piano and his own determination would help him shine. The day of the first attempt had finally arrived. The mansion, usually calm in the mornings, hummed with quiet tension. The boy felt the weight of anticipation pressing on him, but he held his notebook tightly, taking comfort in the familiar notes he had practiced countless times. His mother gave him a reassuring look, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Just play from your heart," she whispered. "Everything else will follow." The mistress of the house was already seated in the grand living room, dressed in her usual elegance, her eyes sharp and expectant. A few guests had been invited, their curiosity piqued by the rumor that the boy might attempt to play the piano. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation, and even the staff paused in their work to witness what might unfold. The boy stepped carefully into the room, each movement deliberate. The grand piano loomed before him, polished and gleaming, a silent judge of his abilities. He swallowed hard, feeling his pulse quicken, but he remembered his mother's words and took a deep breath. He sat on the bench and placed his small hands on the keys, trying to steady his nerves. At first, the sound was awkward, uneven, and uncertain. The boy pressed the keys tentatively, producing hesitant notes that echoed across the marble floors. The mistress frowned, leaning slightly forward in her chair, ready to mock him at the first stumble. Some of the guests exchanged skeptical glances, whispering to each other. The boy's hands trembled, but he continued, determined to play as best he could. Slowly, he began to find a rhythm. The notes became smoother, more deliberate, more confident. He recalled the songs he had practiced so many times, the melodies he had learned from his mother and from the streets. He let his memory guide him, letting the music rise naturally from his heart. The guests, initially doubtful, began to sit straighter, their interest growing as the boy's fingers danced across the keys. The mistress's face, once smug and mocking, now showed a flicker of surprise. She whispered to herself, almost inaudibly, as she leaned back in her chair. "He's better than I thought." She could not yet bring herself to smile or admit her admiration, but the change in her expression was noticeable. The boy paused for a moment, catching his breath, and then continued. He added flourishes he had learned from observing street musicians, little touches that made the music his own. His confidence grew with each note, and the room seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the transformation taking place in front of them. Some of the guests began to nod in approval, impressed by the boy's talent. The staff exchanged glances, quietly cheering him on. The boy's mother, standing at the edge of the room, felt her heart swell with pride. She had always known he had potential, but seeing him perform under pressure, with the mistress watching, was more moving than she had imagined. The mistress, however, remained guarded. She could feel the tension of her own pride pressing down, making it difficult to fully acknowledge the boy's skill. She leaned forward slightly, studying his hands as they moved across the keys, trying to find a flaw, a mistake that would allow her to maintain her superiority. But the boy's playing was precise, expressive, and full of emotion. Each note carried a sense of sincerity that could not be faked out. As the performance continued, the boy began to lose himself in the music. The nervousness that had gripped him at the start melted away, replaced by a deep connection to the piano and the melodies he had worked so hard to master. He was no longer playing for the mistress or the guests. He was playing for himself, for the music, for the expression of his own heart. He remembered the advice his mother had given him, to play from the heart, to let the emotions guide the notes. And now, in this moment, he did. The music flowed smoothly, with a clarity and confidence that drew every ear in the room. Some of the guests were visibly moved, their eyes reflecting surprise and admiration. Even the staff, who had witnessed many talents come and go, could not hide their awe. The mistress, though still hesitant, found herself leaning forward, captivated despite herself. She had underestimated the boy, expected him to falter, and yet here he was, playing with skill and emotion, far beyond what she had imagined possible. A mixture of disbelief and grudging respect crossed her face. She remained silent, but her eyes followed every movement. Every note. The boy reached the climax of the piece he had chosen, a melody that was both complex and expressive. His small hands moved with precision, each note resonating through the grand room, filling it with sound that seemed larger than the boy himself. The guests were silent, held in the spell of the music, while the staff exchanged whispered compliments and nods of approval. Finally, the last note faded into silence. The boy sat still for a moment, catching his breath, the echo of the music lingering in the room. For a heartbeat, there was absolute quiet. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the audience. It started with the staff, quiet and sincere, then grew louder as the guests joined in. Even the mistress, though her expression remained controlled, clapped her hands, a faint acknowledgement of the boy's achievement. The boy's mother stepped forward, tears in her eyes, and hugged him tightly. "You did it," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You showed them what you can do." The boy smiled shyly, a mixture of relief and pride washing over him. He had faced the challenge, played in front of the mistress and the guests, and held his own. The mocking words that had once seemed so cruel now felt distant, replaced by a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing he had done his best. The mistress remained seated, her pride still intact, but the change in her demeanor was subtle yet undeniable. She had witnessed something remarkable, something she could not dismiss. The boy had proven that talent and determination could not be measured by social status or wealth. She remained silent for a moment, processing the reality before her. The boy's skill challenging her assumptions. The staff and guests continued to praise the boy, their admiration evident in their expressions and words. The boy felt a warmth spread through him, a recognition of his hard work and persistence. He realized that this was only the beginning, that the journey ahead would bring more challenges, more opportunities to grow and shine. But for now, he allowed himself to savor the moment, to feel proud of what he had accomplished. As the applause died down, the boy's mother led him gently away from the piano. She whispered encouragement, reminding him that this was just the start of his journey. The boy nodded, his heart full of hope and determination. He knew that the mistress's challenge was not over, that more trials awaited him. But he also knew that he had taken the first step, faced his fears, and succeeded. That night, as he lay in bed, the boy thought about the day's events. He replayed the music in his mind, recalling the notes, the feeling, and the expressions of those who had listened. He felt a sense of growth, a sense that he was becoming more than just a boy who loved to play the piano. He was becoming a musician, someone who could express himself through music, someone whose talent could bridge gaps of class and expectation. He also thought about the mistress, her initial mockery, and her eventual acknowledgement, however subtle. He realized that people could change, that even those who seemed unkind or prideful could recognize true talent and effort. And he understood that his journey would not only be about music, but about perseverance, courage, and the quiet power of determination. As the moon rose over the mansion, casting soft silver light across the rooms, the boy drifted into sleep with a sense of peace and hope. The grand piano in the living room stood silently, a witness to his first triumph, waiting for the next time he would play, for the next challenge, for the next melody that would come from his heart. After his first attempt at the piano, the boy felt a mixture of relief and excitement. The applause and recognition from the staff and guests had given him confidence, but he knew this was only the beginning. Each day brought new challenges, and the mistress's scrutiny was still a presence that weighed heavily in the background. She had not yet fully acknowledged him, and he could sense that her pride made it difficult for her to give him the praise he deserved. In the mornings, he continued to practice diligently. His mother would often watch quietly, sometimes offering gentle corrections or encouragement. She knew that while talent was important, perseverance, patience, and courage were even more crucial. She reminded him to focus not only on the technicalities of playing, but also on the emotions behind the music. Music was not just notes and rhythms. It was a way to tell a story, to share feelings that words could not capture. As the boy's skill grew, so did his creativity. He began to experiment with melodies, blending the pieces he had learned with tunes he had heard in the streets. He improvised, creating harmonies and rhythms that were uniquely his own. His fingers moved more confidently, and the music became more expressive, carrying a depth that impressed everyone who heard it. Even the staff, who had witnessed many talents come and go, noticed the boy's improvement. They exchanged whispered compliments and nods of admiration, secretly rooting for him. One afternoon, the mistress of the house decided to test him further. She approached the living room while he practiced, her expression guarded but curious. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, and watched silently. The boy felt her presence and hesitated for a moment, uncertainty flickering across his face. But then he remembered his mother's advice and the success of his first attempt. He took a deep breath and continued playing, letting the music flow naturally from his heart. As he played, the boy's confidence grew. He added small flourishes and subtle variations that he had developed through practice and observation. Each note carried emotion, each pause was deliberate. The room seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the transformation that was unfolding before them. The mistress's sharp eyes followed every movement, her expression a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. She had underestimated the boy, and now she could not ignore the reality of his talent. The household staff, noticing the intensity of the performance, gathered quietly at the edges of the room. The cook paused from her work in the kitchen. The gardener stopped tending to the plants, and the butler lingered near the entrance. They watched and listened, sharing quiet smiles and nods of approval. The boy's mother stood nearby, her heart swelling with pride, knowing that her son's hard work and dedication were beginning to pay off. Word of the boy's progress began to spread quietly among the household. The staff exchanged stories of his dedication, of the melodies he had composed, of the way he poured his heart into each performance. Even some of the guests who had been present for his first attempt spoke of his talent with respect. The boy remained humble, focused on the music rather than the recognition. He played not for applause, but for the joy and expression that music brought him. One day, a family friend visiting the mansion heard the boy practicing. Intrigued, they entered the room quietly and listened from a distance. They were captivated by the raw emotion and skill in his playing. When the boy finished, the visitor approached the mistress and spoke quietly but firmly about the boy's talent, suggesting that he deserved more than just informal recognition. The mistress listened, a flicker of unease crossing her face. She had not expected anyone outside the household to take his talent seriously. The boy, unaware of the conversation, continued his practice as usual. He experimented with different tempos and dynamics, learning to control the subtle changes in volume and rhythm that could make the music more expressive. Each day, he challenged himself further, pushing the boundaries of what he could play and how he could interpret the pieces he had learned. The mistress, though still proud and guarded, began to observe more closely. She watched how the boy's fingers moved with precision, how his expression changed with the music, and how his confidence grew. She could not deny that his talent was genuine, that his dedication was real. Yet she remained silent, unsure of how to reconcile her own pride with the undeniable evidence before her. The boy's mother continued to support him, offering encouragement and guidance when needed. She reminded him that mistakes were part of learning, that even great musicians stumbled, and that the most important thing was to play with honesty and emotion. She watched as he applied these lessons, growing not just in skill but in maturity and confidence. As the days passed, the boy began to perform more complex pieces, combining the music he had learned with his own improvisations. The sound became richer, more layered, and more expressive. The household began to notice not just his technical skill, but the emotional depth in his playing. There was a story in each performance, a feeling that could not be ignored. Even the mistress found herself drawn in, despite her attempts to remain indifferent. The staff began to show subtle support. Some would quietly move furniture to make more space for him to practice. Others would pause their work to listen, offering quiet words of encouragement. The boy, sensing their support, felt a boost in confidence. He realized that while the mistress's approval was important, the encouragement of those around him, those who genuinely cared for him, mattered even more. One evening, the boy composed a short piece inspired by the changing seasons he observed from the mansion's windows. The melody captured the warmth of sunlight, the coolness of evening, and the gentle rustle of leaves. As he played, the notes seemed to carry the beauty of the world outside, filling the grand room with a sense of peace and wonder. His mother watched, tears in her eyes, moved by the depth and emotion in his music. The mistress, standing at the doorway, could not hide her astonishment. She had expected talent, yes, but she had not anticipated such emotional resonance, such genuine expression. Her pride struggled against the undeniable truth. The boy was extraordinary. She remained silent, unwilling to offer praise, yet unable to turn away. As the boy continued to practice and grow, he began to attract attention from beyond the household. A musician who visited the mansion for a private performance overheard him and praised his skill, noting his potential and encouraging him to pursue formal lessons. The boy listened eagerly, absorbing the advice and guidance, his heart filled with hope and determination. The mistress's attitude, though slow to change, began to shift subtly. She observed the boy's growth, the recognition he received, and the quiet admiration of those around him. Her initial mockery and skepticism gave way to a cautious respect, though she did not yet express it openly. The boy, focused on his music, remained unaware of the change, playing with sincerity and dedication. The household had begun to transform along with him. The atmosphere, once heavy with doubt and skepticism, now carried a sense of anticipation and quiet excitement. The boy's determination and talent were inspiring those around him, reminding them of the power of perseverance, courage, and passion. The mistress, though still proud and guarded, was beginning to acknowledge the boy's abilities, even if only in private moments. One morning, as the boy practiced a particularly challenging piece, he felt a sudden surge of confidence. The notes flowed effortlessly, the rhythm perfect, and the melody full of emotion. He realized that he was not just playing the piano. He was communicating, telling a story, sharing a part of himself with the world. The staff watched in awe, the guests were captivated, and even the mistress found herself drawn in. Unable to ignore the beauty of his performance. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the mansion, the boy closed the piano lid gently. He had played with skill, emotion, and confidence, earning the quiet respect of those who had witnessed him. His mother embraced him, proud of his progress and his courage. The boy knew that the journey ahead would be even more challenging, but he also knew that he had the talent, the determination, and the support to face whatever came next. The stage was now set for the next step in his journey. With each passing day, his skill grew, his confidence deepened, and the subtle support of those around him strengthened. The mistress, though slow to admit it, could no longer ignore the boy's extraordinary talent. And as the boy prepared for the challenges ahead, he carried with him not just the music he had learned, but the courage, passion, and determination that would guide him toward a future full of promise and possibility. The day had begun like any other, but there was a quiet tension in the air, that the boy could feel even before stepping into the living room. His mother followed close behind, carrying a small bag of water and snacks, her eyes filled with pride and worry. The grand piano stood in the center of the room, polished and gleaming, a symbol of the challenge that had become a part of the boy's daily life. Today, however, felt different. Something was changing. He could sense it in the way the household staff moved quietly, in the way the mistress's eyes flicked toward the piano, even as she pretended to be occupied as he approached the bench. The boy took a deep breath. He could hear whispers from the staff gathered discreetly around the room, words of encouragement that gave him courage. He sat down and placed his hands on the keys, feeling the familiar smoothness under his fingers. He recalled the countless hours of practice, the mistakes he had made, and the perseverance that had brought him here. He was ready. The mistress of the house was already present, seated with a composed expression, though there was a subtle tension in her posture. Her friends, who had been invited to witness this next attempt, sat quietly, curious about what would happen. The boy could feel their eyes on him, but he focused on the piano, letting the music guide his thoughts. He began with simple scales, warming up his fingers, listening carefully to each note. The sound filled the room, soft but steady, establishing a rhythm that grew in confidence with each passing moment. Then he moved on to the pieces he had been practicing, combining melodies he had learned with the improvisations he had created himself. The music began to flow naturally, full of emotion and subtle expression. The staff exchanged quiet looks of amazement, and even the mistress's sharp gaze softened slightly as she listened. The boy's mother watched from the edge of the room, her heart swelling with pride. She knew the boy's journey had not been easy. The mocking words of the mistress, the challenges he had faced, and the doubt that had hovered over him all these weeks had shaped him into someone more confident and resilient. She whispered to herself, almost as if speaking to the boy without him hearing, "You are ready for this. You have grown beyond what anyone expected." The boy continued, his fingers moving with precision and emotion. Each note carried a story, a feeling that transcended the room. He could feel the music connecting with the listeners, even those who had been skeptical. The guests were captivated, their expressions reflecting surprise and admiration. The staff watched with quiet joy, proud of the boy they had come to respect and support. The mistress, however, was struggling internally. She had come into this room with skepticism and pride, prepared to witness a child fail. But what she saw was beyond her expectations. The boy's talent was undeniable, and his dedication evident in every note he played. A flicker of respect crossed her eyes, though she fought to conceal it. She had underestimated him, and now the evidence was before her. Impossible to ignore as the performance continued. The boy reached a section of the music that required both technical skill and emotional expression. He had practiced this part countless times, and now it flowed effortlessly from his fingers. The room seemed to hold its breath, every listener absorbed in the beauty and depth of the performance. The mistress's friends leaned forward slightly, clearly impressed, and even the staff who had supported him quietly from the sidelines could not contain their admiration. The boy's confidence grew with each note. He was no longer nervous. He was immersed in the music, letting it guide him, letting it tell a story. He remembered his mother's advice to play from the heart, to let the emotions carry the melody. And he did. The music resonated through the room, a testament to his hard work, perseverance, and natural talent. Finally, the boy reached the climax of his piece. His fingers moved rapidly, skillfully, and with precision, creating a harmony that was both complex and emotionally powerful. The notes seemed to fill the room with energy, capturing the attention and admiration of everyone present. The mistress, though still composed, could not hide her astonishment. She had expected talent, yes, but not this level of mastery and expression. When the last note faded into silence, The room remained still for a moment, as if trying to process what had just happened. Then, quietly at first, and then more loudly, the applause began. The staff clapped with genuine admiration. The guests joined in, and even the mistress found herself clapping, her pride and skepticism mingling with the undeniable truth of the boy's skill. The boy's mother rushed forward, embracing him with tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "You have shown them your heart and your talent. You are extraordinary." The boy smiled shyly, feeling a warmth spread through him. He had faced the challenge, performed under pressure, and proven himself not just to others, but to himself. The mistress, now standing, looked at the boy with a mixture of surprise, pride, and perhaps a hint of guilt for her previous mockery. She had underestimated him, and the realization was a bitter pill for her pride. But she could not deny the truth. The boy's talent, determination, and courage were real. She took a step forward, her expression softening ever so slightly, a silent acknowledgement of his achievement. The boy, sensing the subtle shift in her demeanor, felt a renewed sense of confidence. He realized that the journey was far from over, but he had crossed a significant milestone. His dedication, patience, and passion had been recognized, and he knew that this was only the beginning of a journey filled with challenges and opportunities. Over the next few days, the boy continued to practice with renewed vigor. He explored more complex compositions, experimented with new melodies, and refined his technique. His mother remained by his side, offering guidance and encouragement, helping him navigate the emotional and technical aspects of music. The household staff, inspired by his progress, continued to support him quietly, creating an environment that nurtured his growth. The mistress, while still maintaining her elegance and composure, began to observe the boy more closely. Her initial skepticism had given way to a cautious respect. She noticed the subtle improvements in his technique, the emotional depth in his playing, and the confidence that radiated from him. Though she did not yet express her admiration openly, she found herself unable to ignore the boy's extraordinary talent. A family friend, visiting the mansion once again, heard the boy practicing and was struck by the growth in his skill. They approached the mistress privately, praising the boy's dedication and suggesting that he deserved formal music lessons to develop his talent further. The mistress listened, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. She had begun to recognize that the boy's abilities were exceptional, and that nurturing them could be beneficial, not just for him, but for the household's reputation. The boy, unaware of these private discussions, continued to focus on his music. He experimented with dynamics, tempo, and phrasing, learning to convey different emotions through his playing. He began to compose short pieces of his own, blending melodies he had learned with his personal creativity. Each day, his confidence and skill grew, and the music he produced became richer, more expressive, and deeply moving. The household began to notice the transformation, not just in the boy's playing, but in the atmosphere itself. The once rigid and formal environment was now filled with a sense of anticipation and excitement. The staff quietly offered support, moving furniture to make more room for him to practice, pausing their work to listen, and offering encouragement whenever possible. Even the mistress, though slow to admit it, was affected by the boy's growing presence and skill. One evening, the boy played a new composition he had created, inspired by the beauty of the setting sun and the tranquility of the mansion's gardens. The music was delicate, expressive, and full of emotion. As the last note faded, the room was filled with a hushed silence, followed by heartfelt applause. His mother's eyes glistened with tears of pride, and the staff and guests were visibly moved. The mistress, standing quietly at the back, could not help but acknowledge, even if silently, the boy's extraordinary talent and the emotional depth he brought to his music. The boy realized that his journey was not just about learning to play the piano, but about expressing himself, connecting with others through music, and overcoming challenges with determination and courage. He understood that recognition, though rewarding, was secondary to the joy and fulfillment he found in creating and sharing music. As the evening settled and the mansion grew quiet, the boy reflected on his progress. He had faced doubt, mockery, and challenges, yet he had persevered. His music had touched hearts, inspired admiration, and begun to change the perceptions of those around him. The mistress's attitude, while still cautious, was evolving, and the boy could sense that new opportunities awaited him. With his mother's unwavering support, the quiet encouragement of the household, and his own growing confidence, the boy felt ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. The grand piano in the living room, once a symbol of mockery and doubt, had become a source of strength, expression, and hope. And as he prepared for the next steps in his journey, he carried with him the knowledge that talent, determination, and a pure heart could overcome obstacles. The mansion was unusually quiet that morning. The boy woke with a sense of anticipation, his heart beating a little faster than usual. Today was different. He did not know exactly what the day would bring, but he felt a stirring in the air, a feeling that something important was about to happen. His mother, sensing his excitement, smiled softly and handed him a small notebook with his compositions. "Play as you always do," she said. "Let your heart guide you." The grand piano gleamed in the sunlight, streaming through the tall windows. Its polished surface reflected the boy's eager expression, and the keys seemed to invite him to sit and play. He approached the bench carefully, placing his hands gently on the keys. He could feel the support of his mother, the staff, and even the subtle presence of the mistress, whose eyes watched from across the room. The weight of expectation was heavy, but he took a deep breath and began. He started with warm-up scales, letting the familiar patterns ease his fingers into motion. Then he moved on to pieces he had composed himself, blending melodies he had learned with his own creative improvisations. The sound filled the room, rich, expressive, and confident. Each note carried emotion, each chord a declaration of his journey. The staff, quietly observing, were captivated. The guests who had been invited earlier whispered to each other, clearly impressed by the boy's skill. The mistress, standing elegantly near the piano, felt a mixture of pride, surprise, and humility. She had challenged him before with a mocking tone, expecting failure, but what she saw now was extraordinary. The boy had grown not just in skill, but in presence, in the ability to express himself through the piano. Each note he played seemed to convey courage, determination, and innocence, and she could not deny the talent before her. As he played, the boy felt a surge of confidence. The music no longer belonged solely to the notes on the page. It belonged to him. He experimented with dynamics, exploring the highs and lows, the crescendos, and the pauses that gave the music life. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the melody flow freely, each note a reflection of his journey, his struggles, and his dreams. The staff exchanged glances, smiling quietly. They had seen his determination and dedication, the countless hours of practice, and now they witnessed the fruits of his perseverance. The cook, the gardener, and the chauffeur were all present in spirit, their admiration palpable even in silence. The boy's mother, tears in her eyes, whispered words of encouragement. Proud of the courage and passion her son had shown, the mistress remained composed, though her heart was stirred by the music. Her previous arrogance and mockery were replaced by a reluctant respect. She had underestimated the boy, and she knew it. The boy's talent, nurtured by love and hard work, could not be denied. She realized that her challenge had been more than a test. It had been an awakening, both for her and for the boy. His music had touched something within her, a reminder of what genuine talent and determination could achieve. The boy continued, reaching a section of the piece that he had struggled with in the past. His fingers moved with precision and confidence, the notes flowing effortlessly. The room seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the beauty and depth of his playing. The guests were spellbound, their skepticism replaced with admiration. Even the staff, who had watched him grow from a timid boy into a skilled young musician, were moved by the performance. When he reached the climax of the piece, his hands flew across the keys with agility and grace. The music soared, carrying emotion, passion, and a story of determination. The echoes filled the mansion, touching every corner, resonating with everyone present. The mistress, unable to hide her admiration, felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet acknowledgement of the boy's extraordinary gift. As the final note faded, there was a moment of profound silence. The room seemed suspended, holding on to the echoes of the music. Then slowly, a pause erupted, heartfelt and genuine. The staff clapped with pride, the guests joined in, and even the mistress, though reserved, could not remain silent. Her hands moved, hesitant at first, then with certainty, as she clapped in recognition of the boy's achievement. The boy's mother rushed forward, embracing him tightly. "You have done it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You have shown everyone your heart and your talent. You are extraordinary." The boy smiled shyly, feeling a sense of fulfillment and joy. He had faced the challenge, played with courage, and expressed himself through music. The approval and recognition, while gratifying, were secondary to the joy he felt in creating and sharing his music. The mistress, now standing closer, approached him. Her expression had softened, her previous mockery replaced by respect. "You have a remarkable gift," she said quietly, her voice sincere. "I doubted you before, but you have proven yourself. Your dedication and talent are beyond expectation." The boy looked at her, surprised, but not fearful. He realized that this acknowledgment, though late, was significant. The barriers of class and pride were beginning to dissolve, replaced by respect for his skill and perseverance. From that day forward, the boy's relationship with the mistress changed. While she remained dignified and poised, she began to offer support and guidance, recognizing the importance of nurturing his talent. She arranged for opportunities for him to learn from visiting musicians, providing access to lessons and resources that had previously been unavailable. The household, inspired by his growth, continued to support him, creating an environment that encouraged creativity, practice, and expression. The boy continued to grow as a musician, exploring new styles, experimenting with compositions, and performing for those around him. He learned not only technical skill, but also the art of storytelling through music, the power of emotion, and the importance of persistence. His confidence blossomed, fueled by the recognition he had earned and the support of those who believed in him. Over time, the boy's story became known beyond the mansion. Visiting musicians, family friends, and even some local performers recognized his talent and dedication. Invitations to perform and opportunities for further study began to arrive, opening doors to experiences he had only dreamed of. Yet, through it all, he remained grounded, guided by the love of his mother, the support of the staff, and the lessons he had learned through perseverance and courage. The mistress, once dismissive and mocking, had become a quiet supporter. She respected the boy not only for his talent, but also for the character he displayed in pursuing his passion. She observed his growth with a sense of pride and humility, realizing that true talent could not be constrained by social boundaries or preconceived notions. Her earlier challenge, meant to test him, had become a turning point, fostering recognition, respect, and the development of a remarkable young musician. One evening, the boy sat by the piano, reflecting on his journey. He remembered the early days, the nervous excitement, the mistakes, and the countless hours of practice. He thought of his mother's unwavering support, the quiet encouragement of the staff, and even the cautious admiration of the mistress. Each of these elements had shaped him, guiding him toward growth, confidence, and expression. He realized that music was not just an art, but a bridge, connecting hearts, inspiring courage, and transforming lives. As he played a gentle melody, the sunlight streaming through the windows illuminated the room. Each note carried his gratitude, his joy, and his dreams. The mansion, once a place of strict hierarchy and expectation, had become a space of creativity, learning, and recognition. The boy, through talent, determination, and heart, had transformed not only himself, but also those around him. The final chapter of this part of his journey was one of acknowledgement, acceptance, and growth. He had faced doubt and mockery, yet he persevered. He had played from the heart, expressing his innermost feelings through music. He had earned recognition, respect, and support. And most importantly, he had discovered the joy and fulfillment that came from following one's passion. Guided by courage, love, and determination, the mansion, now filled with the echoes of his music, seemed to reflect the boy's transformation. The grand piano, once a symbol of challenge and mockery, had become a beacon of hope, talent, and perseverance. The boy, sitting at the keys, felt a sense of purpose and belonging. His journey was far from over, but he knew that with music as his guide, the support of those who believed in him, and the courage within his heart, he could face whatever lay ahead. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the mansion, the boy played a final piece for the day, a melody of gratitude, triumph, and hope. Each note carried the story of his journey, the lessons he had learned, and the people who had supported him along the way. His mother watched with pride, the staff listened with admiration, and the mistress, quietly standing at the back, felt a deep respect and perhaps a newfound humility. The boy closed the piano lid gently, feeling the weight of accomplishment and the joy of self-expression. He had faced challenges, earned recognition, and transformed not only himself, but also the world around him. And as he looked forward, he knew that music would continue to guide him, opening doors, bridging divides, and carrying the story of a determined young boy who dared to dream and succeeded beyond expectations.